All right, we are back for some Inside Tabletop. Hey, everybody. If you have not seen one of these before, these are a show where I talk to people who are kind of experts in their various fields about topics of the miniature wargaming industry. And today I'm joined by my buddy Owen. And
I'm not an expert in anything.
Well, the reason I picked you is we just got back from Adepticon. And you have won back-to-back satellite tournaments, which are like big national level tournaments for Infinity. You won Colder Than Carbonite in Canada, and you just won the Adepticon major, the satellite tournament, 50 people tournament. So, and you've played a lot of competitive games. You're maybe the biggest sociopath I know, and therefore you're highly qualified to answer questions about what makes a good competitive game in tabletop gaming, because there's some pretty highly contested topics, and you've played a bunch of games very competitively. Most notably, you played 40K competitively. You've played Warhammer Fantasy Battle competitively. You played War Machine a ton competitively.
Infinity a ton.
And now Infinity a ton competitively too. And it's kind of like your most recent like hyper focus when it comes to what am I playing competitively as a miniature game.
Yeah.
And you also fell out of some games because of how they evolved competitively, like War Machine in particular and Warhammer the Old World just recently. You kind of fell out of competitively and for a bunch of different reasons. So we usually set ourselves a timer, 30 minutes. So I'm going to set a timer right now for 30 minutes. And we got to hash this out. So first things first, what do you think about, I'm going to do 4 things in a row. And what, I guess the first question is, what do you think should or shouldn't be in the competitive, the tournament organized side of gaming? And to name some elements, one of them is painting. One of them is sportsmanship scores. And then another thing is things like comp packages and death clocks. I'm going to kind of lump them together because those are typically things that exist outside the realm of like the game itself. Like using a death clock.
I have it backwards already.
Sorry?
I think death clocks and comp are the game itself.
Okay.
I think
but sometimes there's games
painting and sportsmanship are not part of the game.
So for instance, like take Infinity, the competition pack, the ITS document is separate from the rule book. Right, so not necessarily they're
the
made by
they're the rules.
Exactly, they're made for the tournament. They are the rules.
Yeah,
and then on top of that, you can add things like extras. Sure. So like Games Workshop, for instance, has a tournament pack, but then some tournaments will add additional things on top of that tournament pack, like a death clock. And at Adepticon this year, there was death clock, and somebody lost the final or whatever because they clocked themselves.
Sure.
So how do you feel about those 3 things? And let's just start with painting, because I think painting is like the obvious one. Does it have a place inside of?
Well, take painting and sportsmanship in one, because these are the same.
Soft scores, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
These are like,
they're not winning the game.
If you have a competitive game and you're going to play a tournament, and there is a tournament setting for that game, decide right off the get-go is this a tournament that can be won purely by playing the game very well? Mm-hmm. And if you say no, then add in sportsmanship and painting to be relevant parts of your scoring. And if the answer is yes, then painting and scoring don't matter at all. And just separate them. They can be another event that is happening while the tournament is happening, measuring how good of a time people are having with sportsmanship, or you can measure the quality of these different painters as part of a painting display over lunch. But that's a separate event. That's a
whole other tournament of painting.
You may have had a medal and it took place with the tournament and the same guy who organized the TO did it, but it's not the tournament anymore. The tournament is the game that you played and the scoring that you got in that game, and then your ranking against the other players and your ability to be successful at whatever the thing was. That's the tournament. And all these other things are added pieces on top of it, which is to say painting, sportsmanship.
So what do you think about sportsmanship then?
Same boat.
How so? So like if sportsmanship, there's kind of 2 ways of looking at sportsmanship. Is it scored for whether or not you do well in the event?
Right.
A lot of games have done a lot of different ways of doing it. So some of them, it's you automatically start with points and you get docked potentially, like as a punitive thing. Yeah. If you have like calls against you,
0 to +5, -5.
Yeah. That's right. And then other ones have done things like it's a separate award. Right,
yeah.
where like you can get
often
get
that's
voted.
The one you see.
Yeah, you get voted, and then it's not actually scored as part of the tournament.
Right,
and that's the kind of to your point where it's like it's its own game, basically. Are you a nice guy or not? And do people?
Because that's my biggest thing about the sportsmanship award is how do you fail sportsmanship? What do you need to do to lose at sportsmanship, right? Like,
and some people have put it in as a tiebreak, basically, where you start with X score.
right,
And because it's worth such a small, tiny part of the tournament,
right,
it doesn't really impact your overall score until you get to the very top, where people might be a point or two
right,
separate. And then it gets really contentious because, like you just said, how do you score if you're a nice person or not?
right. And that's the issue. So like if you want to do a tournament, and again, the point is, in my mind, to do a tournament is to be competitive within the mechanics of your rules and see who's the best. Is sportsmanship relevant? For sure. You can have a score for sportsmanship. If the guy who won every game and the guy who won every game, one loses because that other guy who he played at 3, 5, 7, 10 rounds ago gave him a 1 instead of a 2, that's silly.
Yeah.
They should play each other. Like, go to the next step if you're so perfectly tied. But most games don't allow for that.
So would you agree then that there's a difference between sportsmanship and conduct?
Maybe.
Because to me, conduct is something like, say someone's fucking like throwing models or throwing dice.
Right.
That's a conduct thing to me, not a sportsmanship thing. Right? Like if someone like fucking throws one of your models or like throws dice at your models and is like having a conduct thing, that's a person that maybe shouldn't be playing in the tournament, period. Because that now you're acting in a way that's maybe not okay to just even be in that space. And so we're not talking about sportsmanship anymore. Sportsmanship to me is a positive thing. How you handle yourself during like a negative play experience and how engaging and nice of a person you are. And like I said, that could be its own award. But then if you get to conduct thing, how do you police conduct? Because if conduct doesn't matter and you're telling the other person to fuck off during a game,
right?
Like where's the middle ground there?
But now you're impacting the ability of the game to function, right? Yep. Like that's a judge. But that's not the same thing, like you said.
So you're saying
when you're talking about these conduct
do you see the
things,
thing as a line like sportsmanship?
Yeah, of course. Like if the ability to play the game is impacted by someone's actions, then you're no longer playing the game.
So how does the tournament handle that?
Kick them.
Okay.
Like
what if they're the best player?
Doesn't matter. If again, and this becomes, if your conduct is to such a degree that the game doesn't function anymore, you're throwing things at models, you're not participating anymore.
Or you're shit talking and
you're
just
you can shit talk all you want. That's part of the game.
Is it though?
Why not?
Is it though?
It's a social game. You're standing across the table. Turn off the chat if you don't want it. Put your headphones on. Do you need your headphones off to play the game? Then you need to talk to the other person.
Yeah.
And you invite that person.
I'm just saying it's a slippery. I can see why
you don't get to decide what disrupts the other person.
But but if you're actively trying to disrupt the person during gameplay,
you're going to assign a 10 to me? That's where I go, like, you can't measure that. All that measures, you measure if they did to prevent the game from playing.
That's outside the game. You know what I mean? Like, that's outside of the rules of the game, of how we play the game.
If I
talking to someone, tell them they fuck off, tell them they suck, tell them their fucking mom slept with like 25 guys. Like, if you can start hockey chirping this guy, you're like, sorry.
Sure. And and you can, and this is again, like, do you want to use that? So like, you could say you can't harass your opponent. Sure.
It's live hockey.
That could be a rule. Sure. But this is what I mean. Like, that's exactly my point.
Yeah.
There are mechanics within the game that allow and disallow for certain behavior.
And I'm just devil's advocating. Is like, in past eras, it has been so bad that people have put in sportsmanship and conduct scores to try and curtail that. You know what I mean? Like, we've all seen the guy either at the game store, at the tournament, who like storms off or is a complete piece of shit, or like that has existed in everyone's experience. And just because you can handle it, I think the difficult position of the tournament organizer or even the game company they're trying to write a pack is, how do you plan for that in advance?
Right.
You know
well,
how do you
this becomes the conduct. Like, you add in a harassment aspect to participation in your tournament, right? And so like, when we're talking about this, like, to be very specific around the differences of what you're describing, one side is sportsmanship, which is to say, how did you handle yourself while this took place? And the other one is harassment, which is to say, did you demean or an insult or harass your opponent, or is your conduct to such a low degree that you prevented the game from functioning? So this is like, in my opinion, if you're losing your game and you get mad and start packing up before the game's over, disqualified. You're out and you're not allowed back. Sorry, maybe you'll feel better sometime in the future, but you can't come to my events anymore because you ruined it for yourself. You ruined it for your opponent. You made it hard for the TO and every person who you could have played or have played in the past. You've undermined the entire event for them.
So, and that's a conduct thing. And
that's a conduct thing because you prevented the game from being able to function.
Agreed.
If you were like, I can't believe I lost. This sucks. I'm going to shoot that guy. Okay, fine. Go ahead. Kill him. That's a sportsmanship for sure. But the game continues to function. The game continues to play. The scoring will be measured at the end.
Yeah.
They are not the same thing.
Yeah. But I think they are equally important, and we should make a distinction when we talk about them, right? So then sportsmanship stuff, you're of the opinion that if that's a thing that is tracked in the tournament, it's its own value, it's its own prize.
Right.
It doesn't have to do with who the best general was.
Correct.
Now, so let's get to the second part of this then. If soft scores are something that are kind of on their own merit, they're to one side, and the tournament packets provided by the company. So for instance, the people who make the game, Infinity has ITS, there's the decks for Warhammer 40,000, there's a General's Handbook, right, for AOS. Some games
document, ITS pack, whatever you want to call
some games only have the rulebook though. So for instance, Warhammer the Old World only has the rulebook. What's your opinion now on comp packs or community FAQs or making your own version of the game's sort of like curation for the tournament? Because this is kind of like the second chunk of this right now. Soft scores, first piece. Second piece, the TO is manipulating the game into a new state to be played at that tournament. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I guess it comes down to you can manipulate it in any way you want, and any number of people can participate at their choice. But as soon as you manipulate it, you have to recognize that you're no longer playing the game. You've now made a new thing. And like
a new separate game.
And that's fine. And you can play that. And maybe if you can get every tournament that plays this game to play by the same rules. Now, normally the way you would do that is the company does that because they're the final stamp always. Like they can release an ITS document and you don't make like the Canadian version of that or the Carbonite version or the Adepticon version because that's crazy. How would you be able to measure across these different events how you're doing? And again, oh, you won that tournament? Well, that comp allows for this.
Right.
So you undermine the ability for you to have like a way to communicate that tournament's results because it's always in flux based on which rules you happen to participate by. So if you want to make a comp rule and like change the way the mechanics of the game function, either because of how you score and how you win, or what you're allowed to bring, or how much of what you're allowed to bring, or any other aspect of that, fine. And within that event, them's the rules, and that's the way you're going to play it, and you're going to measure how you did according to that. But it doesn't carry to anything else. It doesn't mean anything to any other event unless they play the exact same way.
And it's interesting because some companies do, like on a regular basis, change up the tournament formats. Like ITS, we play Infinity. They do it every year, right?
War Machine used to do it too, all the time.
War Machine's doing it every year. We have Workshop doing it every 3 months. There's an FAQ. To try and balance things, a balance update based on tournament results and their meta watch. And then it seems like for a while, General's Handbook was every 6 months. Now they're doing it every year again.
Okay.
Warhammer 40Ks every year. So it's on like a regular occasion. Warhammer the Old World doesn't have anything. So it's being made by the community. It feels like the community is trying to fill that vacuum.
Right.
Do you think it's like what's the rate at which you think that's good? Like how often do you think if the company takes it on, like Workshop does sometimes, like Infinity does, War Machine did, what do you think the good rate is for it? Do you like a season? Do you think that they should try and balance?
How often do they?
Yeah, like how often? Because like if they're like, there's either engaging this or not engaging in this.
Right.
And if your preference is we all play the same thing because then we know who's the best, then what do you think the right rate is for people doing it? What do you think that does for the company? Like how does that like benefit them?
I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to how hard is it for the company to do that, right? Yeah. Like
everyone has the internet now. That seems to be the way that.
I just mean to say that like someone has to do the work. Sure. Like it isn't a zero effort. I just make up new rules for the new edition. Yeah. Like you have to have an understanding of where you're at and where you're going. Pack edition,
not even the new edition of the game. I mean like the whatever the.
Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah. But what I mean is that like you have to have an understanding of what the previous pack was and what it stressed, what it challenged within the mechanics of your game, and what the new pack that you're going to make will do that is the same or different than the previous pack. Because if it's all the same, then there's no point doing it. It's just the same thing. So you have to change it. And then why are you changing it? How often do you do that? How long do your games take and how many events do you have? Like if you're going to use tournaments as a means to kind of understand how your game is played, which there's an argument about that, but that's not about tournaments. That's a different subject. If you're going to do that and that tournaments are going to impact the way games are balanced or designed, then you need to give enough time to be able to collect enough data to be able to do that. And your organization will decide how much that's going to be.
Yeah.
How much do I feel it is? For Infinity once a year, probably good.
Seems fine. Yeah.
Probably fine. For 40K, probably a year, maybe less, because they have considerably more events. They could, if they had a structure for pulling in data more
they do
efficiently.
now. They've officially, I think they own Best Coast Pairings, or
There you
they've
go.
partnered with them. So
wherever
like,
they can
they
scrape
didn't
all
have
that
that.
data.
It's really funny because they didn't have that until just recently. And I think within the last year,
Sure.
they've now worked with Best Coast Pairings to get all these results and get all this metadata, which is really funny because the game we like the most that does it yearly has been scraping that data since the beginning.
Right.
We're on 16 seasons now of ITS.
Yeah.
And we've always submitted our data on their OTM. Like they've had software for doing this.
Yeah, I've definitely put at least one of my armies in OTM before.
But most people put their army lists in.
Yeah.
And like they can see what army got played, what units got used.
How often,
they can
who
scrape
won,
all of that stuff.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep.
and see who won and who lost, which is really interesting because it feels like obviously they're a much smaller organization, but they have access to all this data now.
Because that is not hard to actually scrape.
Yeah.
Like in the age of computers, if you just make
can figure
that
it
part of your system, you can just do that. So like to the original point of how often should you do these releases, if you're going to use it as a way to measure the state of your game, what's the balance of my game? Have I messed up? Is it all one knight and 32 guardsmen in every Imperial army?
Yeah.
Then you should do it as often as you feel is appropriate to not lose player engagement, right? And like, is it once a year? Is it 6 months? Is it 2 years? Whatever.
And let's talk about that reference you just made. The one
I remember.
32. It's the Loyal 32. This was a
Right.
thing in 8th edition Warhammer 40,000 where there was no comp in the beginning. Remember the no comp in the beginning 8th edition book where like, was it like Gilliman and 9 Storm Ravens or something won some tournament early on, and then
12 Hive Tyrants
12 flying
like
Hive Tyrants, something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, and they had to put comp back in because they took it out for a minute, and then they had to like make the rule of 3.
Yeah.
That was really early in 40K 3rd edition or 8th edition.
Yeah.
Because once you just take the rails off, you got to make some adjustments, and they made some adjustments pretty early on.
The game wasn't made to be able to be competitive.
Yeah.
Like that.
They didn't take it on in the beginning.
Yep, and that's fine. You can do that, and here's the results. And people didn't.
And the
enjoy
old
that.
world thing is that where people didn't enjoy it, so they made up competition rules.
Now they
outside
had
the
comp because of the way you build your armies in the old world, but people don't like the comp. They feel that it doesn't play the way they want it to play, or certain things are too efficient for what they do because of the nature of the rules.
Well, and for 3rd through 7th edition Warhammer 40K, they had comp because everyone had the force organization chart. Every army was
Old World has
effectively
that, right?
Yeah,
that exists in
Yeah.
theirs, and like Infinity doesn't, but it
Nope.
plays different
It's
rules for how
open-ended.
it makes it. I'm sure War Machine is still Warcaster plus more jack points plus units.
Sure.
Like I'm sure that's still
Because those are kind of like that. That's an example
These are
of
all
like
force orgs.
baked in force organization where that's a comp rule in and of itself.
Yep.
Because everyone kind of has to fit this small template of like what
Right.
you get access
It also
to.
means that the variance between them can't be too high.
Yeah.
You don't get discounts for being in a different force org slot. Like you can make a fast attack unit cheaper if you're not allowed to take it without bringing a troop choice.
Yeah.
Because now it has a sub cost that's being eaten up by another thing. Infinity doesn't play those rules because it's just Swick points. And the only thing you're doing is the value of the models. But it means that every model needs to be closer on a curve. Otherwise, these models will always show up because there's no limits on them. And like that's what happened for early 40K. It's just bring Hive Tyrants because dollars for points, they're the best. And so that's what you do. And like
And they flew, which means they could get anywhere.
whatever
do
the reasons
anything.
are. And
they
you can
fought, they shot, they did all the
convert that to
things.
whatever thing works for that game. These guys do the objective instantly.
This
and
is
for
the
free
best
everywhere.
all-around unit. Spam it.
Yeah.
And the Loyal 32 was that
Most
8th
efficient,
edition. There was an
yeah.
allied detachment where every Imperial army could take a knight and 32 guardsmen.
Yeah.
And I think it
generated a whole bunch of command
It was
points,
command
and
yeah.
it was a bunch of like drops and whatever, whatever mechanical benefit it had at the time. That was the optimal way to play.
And the joke became everybody had it, so eventually
Right.
they got rid of your ability to take it.
So they chose that they were going to use tournament results as a way to balance their game.
Mm-hmm.
And because that happens, do not include sportsmanship and painting because you corrupt the whole process. If you're going to tell me that sportsmanship and painting count for score and you're going to balance my army and I lost because I didn't paint, so my army gets stronger?
Stronger painted.
No, weaker. If I'm losing because I'm not painting, my army gets buffs, but I won my games.
Right.
Don't do that. Like you can't do it. Like Why does Infinity's ITS not allow painting to be part of the actual scoring for ITS? Because you'd corrupt all that data if a hackathon player did really well at the tournament, but actually scored lower in the tournament because he didn't paint his models.
Yeah.
So now we're like, oh, well, the Shuji didn't do very well. We should buff
That's a good argument for it.
And it's like, don't do that.
If you want, well, that's a good argument for if you want fun, engaging tournaments where the people organize it can actually get good data. Then
you can't use the
right.
ancillary
It does slightly corrupt the data. Well, it makes the scrape set way more complicated.
Right.
Because you have to look at it in a way more complicated
and assuming that you have a way to even measure the differences between those.
Yeah.
Like if you submit a score out of 100 and you lost 30 points for painting and sportsmanship, is my army a 70? I won 100% of my game.
And that being said, the irony of everything Owen's saying is he never plays with unpainted armies, and he also will ask his opponent what they know about his army every time he plays.
Yeah, sure.
Like that's the funny thing is you're making these arguments, but at the same time, you're the guy that hates playing with unpainted miniatures.
Right, and I don't like people proxying, and I don't I don't like it when people
like
are
slow
shitty
play.
when I'm playing against them. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, of course, I don't like these things, and I'm going to act in a way that encourages sportsmanship and encourages the hobby and things like that. But that's not the tournament.
Yeah.
I choose to play like that.
Yeah,
you don't have to. You can be much more aggressive or not,
sure,
or whatever. But that's the difference, right? And like those are ancillary things that it is a social game at the end of the day. And if I go and have a shitty time because I encounter people who are shitty all the time, I'm not going to play, right? Or maybe I will, but I'll just become like that. And then, hey, look, it's War Machine.
And then you do get a value to it too. And that's the flip side is you do get an understanding of why people are and aren't buying things. And you do encourage people to buy things they're not buying right now by knowing how to make them better and lift them up so that people want to buy them. So there's like, I do think there's a legitimate business case
to
for
not include ancillary things within those,
but also to run these events and to do competition packs for them.
For sure.
And again, not to necessarily focus on the fairness of the winning and losing and results, but focusing on, well, I want people to be able to include all these things and have a reason to include all these things. So those compacts, like to give you an example, is in that unscripted composition of like early edition, 8th edition, 40K, where there's no force organization chart anymore.
Right.
There's no reason to buy Termagants if you can just buy Hive Tyrants.
Yeah.
So having a force pack or a composition pack where there's value, and even like in the way that you score missions, there's value in having these things that people don't buy because they're not big and sexy or cool.
Right.
Then gives you that business reason for doing it. So there's reasons outside of just this is efficient in this game, but the what you play for makes people decide whether or not something is worth buying or not. Like a great example right now is, let's take Warhammer the Old World again. Infantry is the most time-consuming and expensive thing to include in your army, and it's not necessarily fun to use in the game or have like a bunch of scoring value.
Yeah.
If they decided they wanted to write a competition pack for Warhammer the Old World, there could be massive winning benefits all of a sudden just in the way that missions are structured and what you have to do with infantry to make them good. Yeah. Not outside of like fighting. You have to change the game mechanically to make them like better or worse or less.
You just do scoring packs.
You just have ways that they score.
You score this area based on the number of models in it, rather than anything else.
And all of a sudden
you could do stuff like that.
I feel differently about the experience I just had painting 50 clan rats.
Right.
Because now I can see their value. I can make ways for them to be good on the table. And I think that's an undervalued thing.
Infantry are worth 3, cav are worth 2, monsters are worth 1.
Exactly.
Like you can do stuff like
that. Or infantry holds against cavalry holds against monsters.
I just mean to say, from purely a scoring thing, like you could do that. You could tier it where that the most mechanically powerful are the least valuable in your scoring system.
Exactly.
To offset and make people be encouraged. Now you have to figure out the balance, and well, that's welcome to game design. Like that's your job.
But that means that there is now all of a sudden like a value to that for the company doing the tournaments. And because people predominantly, and this is going to be my last question because we're running out of time. We got like 10 minutes left. It is, what is the value of tournaments in gaming, you think, for these companies? Because I do think there's a value in it. One, I think it elevates the notoriety. Like people see tournaments, you know what I mean? Even in stores, people see a bunch of people playing the game, and that's good advertising. That just gets people to do it. Two, and this is both a good and a bad, and I want to hear what your opinion is. It becomes the common way to play games. Right. Like when you're playing strangers, if I know that the tournament way of playing a game is this, I prepare my army not knowing you, you prepare your army not knowing me, we play a game,
Yeah.
right?
We know what the rules are.
I think that's the most valuable part about having good tournaments.
Okay.
So what do you see as being the benefit of there being a tournament system?
I mean, one of them is the continued sales of products within your game
Sure.
and the balancing around tournaments.
Yeah.
If you can distill your game to such a way that you're seeing it played by people who are trying to optimize, to your point of you can sell termagants if you're required to take termagants, so you should
Or they're good in the game.
you should
somehow.
mechanically
Yeah.
make them valuable in whatever way within this system so that people will buy them. And then in buying them, the game continues and everyone gets to keep playing. So like
Yeah.
there's one benefit. The notoriety, I just agree with. Like people talk about tournaments, people do it. Other games out there, like for one example, is Pokemon. They had a winning tournament. I don't follow Pokemon, but I saw the product and they sold a deck that was the deck of the guy who won the tournament. And on the back of the packaging was a little blurb about why
cool.
he did it.
Yeah.
And so like this was a thing that you could purchase.
They did that in ITS a couple of seasons. Remember they
Sure.
did the army list. They did interviews for the interplanetary
Yeah,
winner,
and they sell that as a box.
They sell it as a thing. Yeah.
Yep, you can do
There's like a
stuff
bundle
that,
you could buy on the website.
right?
Yep.
And now there's like a double dipping of why that's good, right? One, it's like a good sales piece because people want to buy it because it was successful, and the other one is it encourages the tournaments because this is the kind of you could be the face of this new box set, right? That's an incentive to do it. You get both benefits out of that. And then as far as like, what are the other values of tournaments? To go the other way, like the negative values of tournaments is the issue that I view that Old World's having. You don't have a tournament system right now. You have a bunch of opinions of what tournaments should be, and you're all playing them slightly differently. And so you can't release the pack of the winning army because it wouldn't even be legal in this other tournament.
Yeah.
You're playing a different game.
Yeah.
Like
you have there's a lack of consensus.
Sure.
And so they haven't kind of, and I think they don't, we're using Old World as an example just because it's a high profile one basically.
Of course.
But like it doesn't mean.
But it's so clearly the thing right now.
Yeah.
Like it's very popular.
And
it's
I don't
a solid
think
game.
And I don't think it's make or break either for them because I think Workshop will still sell that stuff even
Right.
if they don't have like a tournament system. But it's a thing that would help probably.
But it's also an incentive to all of you people who are interested in the tournament scene and both from either side, the players, the runners, or the observers, like whoever's going to be in there, the TOs to the competition to the outsiders watching it. It is in everyone's interest to have a consistent rule set, whatever that may be. And the problem is that if you deviate too far from the book, you can't have a let's just buy this game and start playing together because now you're playing a different game than what the company actually produced. So you have to try and find a balance between those two. But if you don't change it at all, well, whatever the motivations are that caused you to want to change it in the first place, it's all Hive Tyrants, it's all Dragons, it's all Flying Circus, whatever. The company's not going to recognize that potentially.
Yeah.
Now, is the discourse loud enough? Sure, maybe. But is the discourse the way they use, or do they scrape? Right?
Yeah.
Like, if you make a comp rule, but the app that you use to submit your armies doesn't explain the comp, and I get a bunch of numbers around what units are used, and I make an adjustment in my organization based on it.
Yeah, it just doesn't mean anything.
I've done nothing. I haven't resolved the issue because the players were self-selecting what was the things that they would or wouldn't use
in all these individual things, and so the data comes through all skewed.
So now, what do you have? You have the unending, infinite abyss of shouting that happens on the internet.
Yeah.
And then a few tournaments that people went like, oh, well, that one was good because of this comp. And it's like.
And what's interesting is if you understand your game, and I think this is a really good example that we play quite a bit too, you can actually use your tournament pack, like let's say yearly,
to experiment
and also to be the balancing factor, right? Like it can be the thing that because it's far easier to balance what you play for than to completely rewrite your games and all your arguments. Yeah. It's way less work. And it's way more, it's a lighter touch that can have a bigger impact.
Right.
And the experience you and I have with that is Infinity, because they would roll out things like, so for instance, there's a period, I was just going to talk awareness. There's a period in which tags, which are the big prestige robots in the game, just didn't get used. They were too expensive, they're too big, and they experimented with small rules over time. So one was called Armored Fury. It gave them the ability to hit and be like more damaging in melee. The second was a rule called Tactical Awareness, which was not just the name of our podcast, but a rule where a model can generate additional orders, which are goes, basically activations themselves internally. And so bigger, more expensive models would get to act more times, where the economy of that's usually 1-to-1, where a single model only gets to go once. Now bigger models would go more than once. And it drastically changed the game.
Yeah.
Like it drastically increased the value of something. And they did it for everyone all at the same time through the tournament pack, as opposed to going and like shifting and touching.
And then they can scrape the data because they have a consistent tournament pack. So like, we made this adjustment. Did it affect the use of tags?
Yeah.
We made this adjustment. Did it affect the use of tags? In making this adjustment, what did it push down? What stopped showing up because we adjusted these tags? And like, you can do all that kind of stuff. And it's like, there's a value in these tournaments beyond notoriety and the enjoyment of the people who are playing it. It's like there's a practical dollars for time value if you do this consistently and with intent and on a short enough lifespan that you can react in a way that you don't lose all your players. Like, I don't want to use video games as a comparison because video games is its own animal. And
tabletop board games are creeping more and more towards trying to be video games.
Everyone's trying to be esports.
Everything's trying to creep
like all things are creeping towards that. But to finish the point on my views of tournaments, video games can't get a handle on what they want for tournaments. You can see it because some are successful and some are not. And no one knows what the difference is. And some is viewership and some is the monetary part. And some is the balancing part. And like, how do you balance for a tournament versus how do you balance for you and me playing a game?
Right.
They're not the same thing. Those people are playing in a different world than you and I are. And that's the only other part I would put, and I wanted to bring it up because there is a tournament meta and people talk about it, but it's not the game meta, right? Are you playing a tournament list or are you playing a fun list, right? Like 40K is notorious forever being like that, right? If you balance your game around tournaments and you nerf things that don't make sense to a regular person picking it up, do you undermine their purchasing because they didn't participate in the big tournament? And then if you do it that way, is the notoriety of your tournament great enough that all people are aware of what the meta in tournaments is? And is it concise enough that you can actually speak to it?
Well, because that's the great threat. Right? Because then you have D&D. We have D&D. We have War Machine 3rd edition, right? Where like they started just tinkering and changing so often, and all they cared about was the results of tournaments and results of like these high profile games.
Whatever that
they just
website
stopped.
Was. Do you remember what I'm talking about? The forum that they
had?
I forget what it was called, but it was a player driven feedback around tournament outcomes and balance potential.
And the whole
up the game.
Thing
that was the silver bullet for all of the War Machine communities I'm aware of.
Yep.
That became in existence,
you
and
buy
6 months later, it was done.
Well, and you and I went through that with Song of Ice and Fire. Remember, we'd play a game, and the next week the game we'd played would have completely different rules. Or this army couldn't take this unit anymore, or like flayed men are like this. And
this is how morale works. Morale changes.
Morale just completely changes. And we're like, what is happening?
Print a new deck of cards.
Yeah. And it was there we go. We hit our 30 minutes, and it was. But you're right. It was frustrating for me, right? Where I want to build and paint something and take my time with it, and by the time I'm done, it's either totally invalid or changed completely. Like,
and then here's the value of where were the tournaments that backed that?
Yeah.
What data did you possibly have other than you were talking to your buddy, and the internet talked a lot about, whoa, Lannister morale bombing is too powerful, says me to you on Twitter.
Yeah.
Thus deciding the outcome of the game and making every potential player have to print a new deck of cards.
And I think that's where we come back. We come back to that timeline thing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good place to end this on, is like that yearly, not even just the yearly timeline, because maybe that's reductive. It's have everyone know what the timeline's going to be, and have it be a reasonable amount of time that you get to have time to build, paint, play, to complete your gameplay loop.
Sure.
Because I think that's the danger. You get your data. I think that's super important. Your data needs to be over time, so you're not reacting too quickly. Because I think that's what we're talking about, that death spiral. They're just fucking twirling the steering wheel of the car back and forth, and everything's flying off. So having a decent timeline, having everyone know what it is, and have an expectation of what that timeline is.
We have to open the door for people to be able to identify that whatever was the first come power wasn't the only power.
That's right.
Because if you react to the first thing that pops up, you didn't give an opportunity to change.
And you gave no one's ability to adapt to it a chance.
Right.
Because really powerful things at the beginning of edition typically aren't they're the most obvious,
Yeah.
but they're not the thing that everybody gravitates towards by the end of the edition, where more
Yep.
like powerful things show up.
Turns out Brick of Archers was actually one of the
Was
most
actually
powerful
really
things.
cool. Yeah,
Bricks
exactly.
of infantry
Yeah.
have a value, but only a specific kind.
But
and
you
it does
but
this
you
thing.
but you have
Yeah.
to wait to see people react
Yeah.
to get that data through and have it. I think that, to me, that is kind of a panacea against all of these issues. One, it gives people who are more hobby inclined the ability to get through and actually enjoy that season and like play through and enjoy their things without too much change. Two, you get real results if you are scraping data,
Yep.
right? Because you actually get the time for the reaction to happen and for people to try and self-correct and shake out. And then three, you get the time for yourself to actually plan really good quality changes, improvement, whatever it's going to be.
To measure a whole bunch of other things. How are sales doing during this time? And
That's
how am I
right.
going to react? Is there a pressure there to try and increase the sales of a thing? And so I'm going to balance for that. And like, people don't like talking about that when it's like raw competitive, like you should balance based on the power of things in games. But if things are going down in sales because they don't have power in a game, you should adjust to make it so that sales go up.
And there's lots of ways of doing that too. That doesn't mean necessarily depowering that thing.
Right. Or
that can
other
mean,
things.
That can mean elevating things that deal with that thing too, right? There's a lot of ways of doing that. And for years, that was one of my favorite things about Corvus Belli was they typically didn't take things away from units unless it was an addition change, and then sometimes things would go away. What they would do is they would creep up the stuff that was
the bottom would get higher.
Yeah, the bottom would get higher.
Yep. And now we're at the pinnacle of that. Now they started taking things away
because they did a great reset, right? Because the range was too big. So what's, I guess, final hot take, because we're closing this out. What's the game, and that can be a game in a previous edition too, and not the edition that the game ended on necessarily, like a previous version. Where's the time that you think a company got it the most right, as far as like that cycle, how they handled changes, how they were like introducing like variation and different ways to play? What was your favorite one?
I mean, Infinity on the face of it, like it's the first that comes to my mind because it's the most coherent at how it planned it.
Sure.
All of the others have like through time kind of done it or have failed. And like, did War Machine have a really good tournament pack for a long time?
I think in second edition War Machine, like Mark II was really good for a long time.
But they were missing a couple steps there.
So what do you think? What so?
What happened with sales? What happened with packaging? Because
like in Mark II was doing great.
Sure.
Yeah. Early Mark II Steamroller, like
something was coming out that was really good there, but like it didn't survive because the system didn't exist. Like you had a perfectly huge, growing, unending audience. War Machine was like Privateer Press is the number 3, and like it's GW and then them, and they're overtaking it except for X-Wing, and like that was the conversation during Mark II. And then the question becomes like, I'm not sure what it was, but there was clearly a problem because that didn't self-sustain. If you have this robust tournament system and effective way of measuring success and failures of your different model ranges and how balanced your game is, and you're taking conscious effort to try and balance correct for that, with the understanding of that it is for a business, and it collapses within 5 years, then it means that whatever method you were using to measure those things wasn't successful.
It feels like the iteration was the problem there.
Whatever happened over time.
It was, there's a moment where it's really, really good, but then they keep adding new stuff to it and it starts to get away from them.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the data scrape required to actually.
Because I can remember that from second edition, that it doesn't have a data scrape. Yeah. They only had
There's no way to record
the winners.
They had anecdotes. They had anecdotes and the people that they would bring in. And
it's why I would still put Infinity, because of the nature of that army app. Like that army app puts it a league ahead because they can sit there and go, we're removing JSA from Yu Ching because we want to do a narrative thing. We have a sales push. We have some other idea that we want to do. And while some of you will be upset about that, here's all the numbers that make it that. Why did 1% of all Yu Ching players bring this Keisetsu doctor? Turns out he was 1 point cheaper. So what we're doing is removing him from your faction, and this other doctor is 1 point cheaper now. Thus solving the problem. And like, here's how my tournament directly affected both sales and gameplay and balance. Like, there you go. What did War Machine do to do that? It
wasn't just planning, it was implication.
I don't know.
I think it was anecdotal. So the data was probably unreliable. Like they tried to get the data. Yeah. Right. They had war cores. They had
people talking about it. They looked at the reviews of the tournaments. They looked at the army that showed up in the tournaments. And you can't sit there and go through every tournament and read every army.
And you also can't listen to the losers. because it's only the winners who are talking, right?
Yep. And then you can look at the losers. You can look at the bottom armies and go like, oh, well.
But you don't know what models
Skaven
they took.
has
like,
a one win in a tournament scene, so we need to
if
buff
you didn't
Skaven,
have that data properly, well, they didn't have that data properly, then they didn't know, right? Because they didn't have an ability to collect it. So you're hearing history as determined by the winners, basically telling you what was wrong with the other teams that they beat.
And they're maybe right. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, you don't have the whole picture, right?
Yeah.
You just don't have the data.
And you don't have everyone on their way up. And like, so like, what my final point on tournaments, like, what's the value? Well, it's the things I've laid out over this conversation.
And it's interesting to watch Workshop pivot into it. And like
Sure.
if they have Best Coast pairings, they have that data now.
Right.
The one thing they won't have that Corvus Belli has is the army list submissions.
Sure.
That they can easily scrape. I'm sure there's some army list submission stuff, but like
I'm confident you could get there.
Yeah,
like,
it feels like they should.
Like their app for a while had a force add armies.
Yeah.
If you had just made it that was submitted, then there you go. You have all that. Now you know every single unit and how many of them, and of those units, how many players had them, and of those units, how many were successful.
Companies love metadata.
And how many didn't show up.
Companies love metadata.
You multiply that by every event you have, and then all of a sudden now
give
you
us
can
an
sit there and
official
go like,
Games Workshop tournament app, and
we're going to talk about SKU 158, 159, and 1510 because these ones are not represented at these 40 events that took place over the last 9 months.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden you can go, okay, well, we need to adjust clearly.
Yep. So everybody get ready for your first Trench Crusade tournament comp book, and then Trench Crusade events and Trench Crusade tournaments, because that's how it's going to grow and be big.
Sure. Yeah. You can do that. But like, I can, lots of value for tournaments.
My favorite one would be would actually have been the Dark Age one. If I was following up from Infinity, the Dark Age one had a really good tournament pack too, but again, it didn't have the information capture. So because Dark Age kind of like came for died like an exploding sun, it was here briefly for a little bit of time, didn't have a chance to iterate or whatever.
Yeah,
I think it had a really cool tournament pack. You got the Geld. The Geld was your invite to Immortals, which is the final tournament. It had all the groundwork for it, but it never had the chance. It never had the digital footprint to try and do that too.
It didn't have it missed the data.
It missed the data.
If the whole iteration, the whole basis of this conversation came from a comment around Age of Sigmar, around Warhammer and why comp matters.
Yeah.
And like, this is my argument. Like, this whole discussion is my argument of like, you can't just make up comps. Like, if the game's dead, if they're not releasing anything, do whatever you want. Like, make up whatever comp you want. But if you want it to succeed, you can't play by your own rules unless you don't care what the company releases.
And it impacts more. It impacts so much more than just tournament results. It impacts the player experience of people who don't play in tournaments, because it becomes the agreed way to play. And you have this like knock-on effect that you just can't, especially in bigger mainstream games like Games Workshop games, you can't ignore that this will trickle down into the rest of your customers eventually. So just take it seriously. And it's a ton of work. And
you need to put a whole bunch of resources into it, because you need to have a way to get that data. You need to have a person who understands what it means.
And the bigger your game gets, the more people are going to try and play it competitively anyway. Yeah. So you might as well take control of that and do something with it. And then provide other ways to play on top of that. Have it not just be the only way to play. Want.
People will find other ways to play. But like, if you want to have tournaments, and there you go. Here's some value.
If it's going to be a competitive game, it's got to be competitive. So there it is. Our talk about competitive gaming and wargaming. We've solved it all, given some basic like pointers as to what we think works and doesn't work. And also, I think the important thing for me is that you have to acknowledge that this affects people that don't give a shit about tournaments in a lot of ways. And that there is also a financial benefit for the creators, the manufacturers of these games to do this properly. Yeah. Because they can get a ton of data about what's selling and not isn't selling. Like, so why not do it?
People talk a lot as players around these tournaments and balances and things like that. And they don't talk about the money side of it too much.
But you can do it right.
But the companies you depend on that. They need to be successful. And so like, oh, we should do pairing and scoring based on this or that. Well, that company should hold a responsibility there. And like, if they're not going to, fine. Go play whatever event you want, make whatever comp you want. But like, remember that game doesn't care about the people who play it the most.
No. So
think about what you're doing when you're buying in on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see more Inside Tabletop in the future. Thanks for coming in. If you guys for watching. I'm Ash.